I appreciate the speakers, the panelists. I like and I appreciate the contributions. And then I just want to say a few things in order somehow to talk about the fundamentals of what we can call Pan-African diplomacy in relation to conflict resolution. Laid spoke at the beginning about Pan-African in the 60s. Then I want to go back to that moment. There was the first Pan-African People's Conference organized in Ghana in 1958. Before that, from April 15 to April 22nd, there was the Conference of Independent African States. There were 8 African countries that were independent: Ghana, Liberia, Ethiopia, Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, and then, why I'm saying that is that because usually when we talk about Pan-Africanism, we want to talk about the congresses of Du Bois, the conventions of Marcus Garvey, and we don't put into perspective the series of the Pan-African conferences that took place on the continent of Africa, started from Ghana, and then later on the second one was going to be in Tunisia in 1960, and the third one was going to be in Egypt in 1961. So during that moment, there were some concepts. Positive neutralism, that was the concept which was promoted by Gamal Abdel Nasser, promoted by Kwame Nkrumah, and then the three pillars of positive neutralism was the three pillars were first independence of Africa from the East and from the West. That was the first element. The second element, it is Pan-African cooperation, and the third element was the liberation, the political and economic liberation of the continent of Africa. So if we want to talk about Pan-African diplomacy, these three elements are supposed to be the pillars of that Pan-African diplomacy. But as I'm saying that, a very important element is that the continent was under colonial rule, the continent was divided along ideological lines, but somehow, and this is what Laid was saying, and then that's why I wanted to, that's why I mentioned his name. Somehow, they succeeded, to promote a common understanding about how, for instance, to resolve the crisis of apartheid, how to deal with colonialism, and then how to deal with the conflict between the Arabs and then the Israelis, and also more important than everything that I just said, the question of the Algerian Revolution. The Algerian Revolution was the central part of those meetings that people organized, and then somehow they promoted. So if we want to talk about Pan-Africanism today in the field of diplomacy, we have to go back to the spirit and the letter and then all the All-African People's Conferences, because they did it. And because Algeria was supported by people, even though there were some countries like Houphouët-Boigny from Ivory Coast, who was on the side of the French. The nuclear test that the French wanted to do to mobilize the Ghanaians, the many other people on the continent of Africa. So we have the best Pan-African practices when it comes to diplomacy. Now, today, if we claim that, and there were some successes and there were some failures, they could not stop, for instance, the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, just to give that as an example. But today, contrary to what Laid, and now I'm going to try and be a little bit, to distance myself a little bit from what Laid was saying. Yes, I know Africa is fragmented today. Yes, I know today there are many blocs. We don't see the promotion of a strong Pan-African consciousness. It is true. But at the same time, we should see some of the manifestations of Pan-Africanism in the streets and in diplomatic circles led by the African Union. I'm going to give you an example. In 2023, there was a conference on reparation in Ghana. And then today, Togo took the lead to organize the 9th Pan-African Congress. And then Algeria, listen to this, Algeria is going to organize at the end of November a conference on the crimes of colonialism. So what I'm trying to say is that even though They are not resolving all the conflicts that exist like between countries. Somehow, on the issue of reparation, we see the build-up of a Pan-African consciousness, of a Pan-African diplomatic expression. And then, so we have to be able to look at all those elements. Yes, we want Sudan the crisis in Sudan to stop. We want to see things in Congo to stop. We don't want to see the crisis between Algeria that used to help Mali, and then Algeria and Mali. So we want to be able to see the resolution of all those conflicts. The only way we can really to reduce the conflicts and the crisis on the continent of Africa is to reclaim Pan-Africanism and to reclaim the spirit of the All African People's Conferences, and it is to promote a strong Pan-African consciousness. This is what I'm going to say for your first question. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I wanted to react. Of course, we doing this debate, then we may not have the same perspective. We may not have the same sources of information. I listened to Dr. Ndimancho. He's very knowledgeable, but I think that there are two elements that he spoke about that I want to react to. The first one is about Mandela. In his analysis, he did not talk about the disastrous role of Buthelezi in South Africa, of Inkatha, who was receiving weapons and then support, from the international community and then from the white South Africans who did not want to lose power. When people talk about Mandela, there is no country in Africa that is so economically sovereign to the point that we can say the country is completely and then totally independent economically. If there is one, I want to hear that. To come and say, for instance, that Mandela gave the political independence, he did not want to do the economic independence. The front was there was a fracture in the Black United Front in South Africa, and people need to know what Buthelezi did. And sometimes when they forget that, there is a documentary called Mandela's Fight for Freedom. It is 2 hours and I think 17 minutes on YouTube. People can see how Buthelezi himself, how he decided to boycott the elections, and then how the Inkatha and the ANC were fighting, and Buthelezi were receiving weapons and support from the white South Africans. So we have to put things into perspective. Mandela made some mistakes for sure. Maybe on the economic aspect, instead of forgiving everything to the Europeans, maybe he could have asked the multinationals and then the white South Africans in order to put together maybe a front, if not a front, a fund that they could use in order to repair apartheid, as we talk about the issue of reparation. That's one element, and there are some other elements. I've read people who criticize Mandela and with some legitimate arguments, then I agree with. The second element, Ndimancho said that he's coming with a new vision of Pan-Africanism. I understand that the economic aspect of Pan-Africanism is very important. We may not agree with the African Union. We may not accept what they do, but at least they produced, some literature. Madame Zamori was talking about the peer mechanism review and some other elements, how they need to, to finance their own institution, their own development. I understand that. But for those who do research, like Ndimancho, and I know he knows that, the Lagos Plan of Action 1980, the Treaty of Abuja 1991, NEPA 2003, and then the Africa Agenda 2063, and today the ZLCAF. All those elements are there. So it is in line with the Pan-African vision. It is the lack of the political will that we do not see in our leaders. And now, if people want to talk about economic development, because I am doing research on the series of the All African People's Conferences I was talking about. In 1958, yes, they put emphasis on the political liberation of the continent of Africa. But in 1960, in Tunisia, the focus of the conversation, beside the fact that Africa needs to be liberated, they put emphasis on the economic dimension of the liberation of Africa. So if we want to talk about new Pan-Africanism, we have to return to the fundamentals. And then 1960, the economic aspect of Africa was clearly stated by most of the people who spoke during that conference. So I just wanted to precise, to make those rectifications for us to understand that sometimes we have the feeling that, we come with new ideas. Myself, as I'm talking about Pan-Africanism and the Ubuntu philosophy. But listen, even though I talk about that, but my sources are Sheikh Diop. My sources are Jordan Gubani from South Africa. My sources are those who came before us. My sources are the reality in Senegal, the reality in Ghana. And then people tried. We put all the pieces together to come with a new division, but we have to accept that, those who came before us, they tried. I can talk about Ahmed Ben Belab, that Laid mentioned. We can talk about Boumediene Ahmed, who was at the conference, Mustafi Chakwi, who was in the conference 58. We can talk about Joshua Nkomo, who was in Accra and who was also in Tunisia. Lumumba, Frantz Fanon, who spoke on behalf of the Algerian Revolution. For us, we have to go back to those people, see what they did in order to take that to the next level. But when we think that we are the one coming with new ideas, we may be making a mistake if we have not explored some other sources. Thank you very much.